This is Travis Wayne Goodsell, and this is the video that will tie everything together because it's the origin of all of the Jewish understanding, Jewish scripture, Jewish traditions, Christian scripture, Christian traditions. Oh yeah, I forgot. I was going to do Christian traditions with the Christian video, wasn't I? I didn't get to that, so they're going to be put in the other category video. Alright. Okay. Alright. Okay. Alright. So this is going to be the Egyptian video. And we'll just make things do as they do. Some people are familiar with this story. Others are familiar with just the names. They don't know the story. Egyptologists obviously know the story. They're the ones telling it. But they haven't made the connection to either the Torah or to the Gospels. They weren't the ones who have made the discovery. I have. I'm the one who made the discovery of glyphs in Egyptian needing to be translated. So Gardner's Egyptian sign list, it's incomplete. And there are many other signs that need to be included and in the listing. I've done it on other videos, so please visit those rather than commenting of, oh, you can't, that's not right, you can't do that, that's not the way it works. Yes, look at the other videos. This is about the last days Messiah. This is the focus of these video series, is his identification. And as I've already done, and I'm not getting too many people, more people are still just interested in the Mormons. You know, their video's coming for this too. So, you have to wait. So, the Egyptian story is a family story. A tale of two brothers. That's the tale of Sinui. That's Joseph in the Bible. But Osiris, Set, and Horus. The three main characters that are involved. And of course Isis, the wife of Osiris, is also involved. Family. Yeah, I don't need to do the origin story for them. That's not necessary for the story. The main story is Osiris, the first pharaoh of Egypt way back when, before recorded time. Even though he helped develop the culture and the language. So apparently there is records. And since the pyramid texts indicate many concepts, especially this main story, it's clear that there would have been original records before the pyramid texts. Because you don't just all of a sudden one day create the perfect script and everybody follows that perfect script. It takes time to develop, but scholars are not quite accurate when they do a lineal time assumption that things progress over time, get better over time, because history has shown us that mankind takes reverse action, gets dumber when they do something stupid. when some leader does something stupid and suppresses the people and censors things. That's happened in Egypt, but that's also happened in other cultures' histories. We don't call them the Dark Ages for nothing. And so Osiris, good king, everybody was peaceful and happy, everything was great and prosperous, and Set, the brother, didn't like being who he was, the king's brother, and he wanted to be the king. And the only way to do that is to murder him. And murder him, he gets to take the throne. And so he held a little banquet party thing, and everybody came, or at least the elite came, and Set held a contest. He built the first coffin, called a box, and was holding a contest to see who the box would fit. You know, as if Osiris was the only person of his height. But yeah, that's what it was. Nobody was able to fit in it, but everybody wanted to try. And it was a fun game until somebody got nailed in the coffin when they got in it. That's right, Osiris got in it, and it was quickly nailed shut. Christians, you'll recognize the nail symbolism, because Jesus was murdered, nailed to a cross. 9-inch nails, ring any bells? Yeah, that's where this comes from. It's from the Egyptians about Osiris being nailed in a coffin. It's symbolic of dying. And set him afloat on the Nile River. The field of reeds is the symbolism behind that in the Egyptian religion. Paradise for Christians. Today thou will be with me in paradise. And he gets up to Lebanon, to Byblos, and becomes a mighty tree. And so Jews, you may remember Ezekiel 17, about the little parable, metaphor, symbol story that's told in there about the cedars of Lebanon, and a eagle takes from the top branches a branch, carries it to the United States, plants it in Northern California to create the oak trees, red oaks, for Oakland. And that's where the last days Messiah is supposed to be born and raised, in the wilderness. But we're not there yet. Isis, you know, she's the wife. She wants her husband back, obviously. So she sends out servants to search the world for her husband's body. And they find him, and they bring him back to Isis, and she has magical powers, and she brings him back to life. And in Egyptian, there's not one full story text. There are portions taken from the full text, and so stories are told in parts in Egyptian. So the pyramid text, it's the story of Osiris is scattered throughout the text, telling certain things as if referring to the original text. And so some of it we actually get from Plutarch, a Greek historian doing his Egyptian history. And he includes some extra information that Egyptologists have not found in the Egyptian records yet. And so I pieced these all together into one story. And what happens is that Set finds that Osiris is still alive. And this time, he chops Osiris's body into 14 parts. Others say 42, and it has to do with the 42 gnomes of Egypt, but at other times there were 14 gnomes, so it just depends on when the story is being told, who's writing the story, their version of it. And so there's different interpretations depending on who's the one giving it. But if you go back to the original, 14, and it's significant because people tend to think of the House of Israel as having only 12 tribes. The 12 tribes of Israel. Well, it's actually 13. If you remember, the birthright blessing son gets a double portion as part of his blessing. That's the inheritance. The birthright refers to leadership of the clan or the tribe or the family group, and the blessing is the inheritance. He gets a double portion, and thus Ephraim and Manasseh is the double portion of Joseph, the birthright blessing son. And so there's 13 tribes, not 12. And so, well, yeah, but that's not 14. Wait till you hear the story of the Egyptians. And so Set chopped the body into 14 pieces and had them cast throughout the 4 quarters of the earth. The scattering of the house of Israel. Sound familiar? Should, because that's what the Egyptians were talking about. Or that's what the biblical author was talking about when he was talking about the writers of Isaiah, for example. And Isis again, you know, she's the wife. She wants her husband back. She sends out the servants, missionaries, to go to the 4 corners of the earth to gather the scattered house of Israel, scattered parts of her husband, and they bring the parts back, and she assembles them together with her magic. The only problem is there's a missing piece, and here's the 14th part. Who was the 14th? Well, the 13th child of Jacob. Come on, you don't know? Remember Simeon? What did he do to that one tribe of people who raped a certain family member? That's right, Dinah, the woman. There was a girl, a daughter of Jacob. And so, what's the missing piece? No phallus. The female. It's kind of a reverse thing, but not having a phallus is the female portion. That's where it comes from. And so Isis made sure to fashion a new phallus for Osiris. In other texts, it's different, but I'm going to the original. And then, depending on the text again, she either becomes the bird that hovers above and conceives magically, or in the other texts, she has sex with her husband. So it's not a porno. They're married. and she ends up conceiving a child, a male child, an heir to the throne of Osiris. But Set had usurped the throne, and Egypt was falling into decay, ruin, and darkness, disharmony, disorder, chaos. And Set found out that Isis had conceived a son, and he knew full well what that means. That means his authority as the new king, the usurped king, is in jeopardy. And so he needed to kill the baby. Kill the baby! Willow reference. Great movie. You dwelt in darkness without me, and it went away? Oh, greatest movie ever. Next to Stargate, of course. Okay, so so what happened with Osiris's body? Well, he was resurrected and he ascended to heaven, where he established the kingdom in heaven. And that established the rituals for the Egyptians in the temple, where the Egyptians have to, pass through the temple and get their heart weighed to make sure that they're good people. They get presented before the veil of the Holy of Holies, and they then, if they pass the test, they're able to enter into the presence of God. That's all symbolic of the afterlife, of when we die, we're buried, we are resurrected, we ascend, and we get to live with God if we're good. And that's where it all comes from. And so Osiris is the creator of the ritualistic performances in the temple on earth in order to get people to heaven, to the place where God dwells. And yes, it's on a sun. The Egyptian gods were sun gods, and thus they were represented as the sun because they were understood to be living on the sun and on the various suns throughout the universe. And so Mormons are not far off. In fact, they're spot on when they talk about the celestial glory of Mormonism being the highest degree of glory and being the glory of the sun, and descriptions of the throne of God being a sun, eternal burnings. And but we'll cover the Mormons in a different video. This is the Egyptians' turn. And the pregnant Isis has to flee from the presence of Set and leave the kingdom of Egypt. And she travels into the western desert, which at the time was not a desert. Egypt used to be green and lush, used to be a wilderness. And something happened that caused the deserts of Africa, just like something caused the deserts of the western United States and western Mexico region. It was not a natural event. It was man-made. Nevertheless, the story goes that she flees into the wilderness with her embryo son who is to be the heir to the throne. And so what is west of Africa? The United States. Plug the continents together. So the United States is the wilderness where the Isis and her son, unborn son, go to live. Isn't that all interesting? All ties together. And so there they're hiding out, and Horus is born, and he is raised by his mother, and she, having magical powers, teaches him her magical powers. And as you can imagine, magical powers simply mean priesthood powers for the religious order. And so Horus was initiated through the religious rituals that were established by his father Osiris, the temple rituals. And he was initiated in those rites, anointed as a Christ to take over the throne. And there's an Egyptian god Thoth, which is David in Egyptian, or in Hebrew, sorry. They're phonetically the same. Jaut and Taut, Daud, David. So Thoth is David, and thus the 18th dynasty is the Thauth Moshe, the David Moses kingdom, the kings of David Moses. And so you have Thauth Moshe the first through the fourth, and then you have other names, but they're all a part of the same family organization, and it's still considered the Thauth Moshe dynasty, the David Moses dynasty, thus the kingdom of David. And so yes, that's King David in the Book of Kings. It's referring to the 18th dynasty, and thus Moses also is in the 18th dynasty, in fact near the end of the 18th dynasty, when a transition occurred from dynasty to dynasty. This Egyptian story is replicated in the Egyptian culture government as well. So every new king is a recreation of this story. The old king dying, the new king, the firstborn son, the birthright blessing son, takes over the throne, restoring the kingdom. That's what the Egyptians understood with each new king. And when you have different dynasty taking over, you also see this reenactment. The Hyksos, for example, you might be familiar with them. They were the Canaanites who infiltrated Egypt and eventually rose to power and took over and created the 16th and 17th dynasties of Egypt. And their god that they adopted was the usurper Egyptian deity Set. And so they're not the house of Israel, people. As much as scholars want to keep Moses and Akhenaten separated by as many years as possible, because there's no way they can be the same. That would be blasphemy. You know, yeah. There's taboo in joining Egyptian and Jewish religions together. They don't like that. You know, the Jews are under the impression that the Egyptians are evil because we were kicked out. Yeah, but that's your homeland. That's your motherland. That's where King David was king. That was where he ruled over Egypt and over Israel. So you're looking for King David in the wrong city. He's already been found by Egyptologists. He's in Egypt. He was buried in the Valley of the Kings. And so, yeah, the 18th dynasty then saw themselves as the Horus group, who took back the throne belonging to their father Osiris. That was their understanding when they kicked the Hyksos out, who were believers and followers of Set. And so the 18th dynasty is the last days in the Egyptian mindset. And yet life continues on through the cycle, because the 18th dynasty then became Osiris near the end of their dynasty, when they were overcome by the 19th dynasty of Seti the first pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, when several of the last pharaohs were trying to fight for authority and pharaohship. The military leader, for example, who was an uncle, took over the kingdom during the chaos time, and he may have been the pharaoh of the oppression. But Set, that was the god of the 19th dynasty, Set, because they conquered the 18th dynasty. They took over the kingdom of Egypt. They usurped it, and so they adopted Set as their god. See how it works? That was in the Egyptian mindset. Everything they did all had to do with this main story that existed long before scholars claim that we have recorded history of. And so every pharaoh is anointed king. That means they were Christ. And so you have a Father Christ and a Son Christ. And I went over this with Christians on their video, because if you say Messiah, they don't get it, and they only believe in Jesus. Nobody else can be Jesus. Okay, yeah, just like nobody else can be Osiris, except when you're being used, unless he's used as a symbol. And the Bible, the Torah, uses Osiris's stories as the template for Hebrew characters. And so you have Cain and Abel. Abel gets murdered. Abel becomes the symbol of Osiris. So Abel is Osiris, because that's the story that he's been adapted to. Notice that the next son of Adam and Eve is Seth. Set, the Egyptian god who usurped the kingdom, the birthright and blessing. And so they couldn't give it to Cain, because that wouldn't make for a fun story, would it? And so the Jewish author said, okay, well, we'll banish Cain from the kingdom of Adam, and he'll form his own kingdom. But then the son of Adam and Eve, who then takes over the kingdom, we'll name him Set. So that's how the Jewish author, the post-captivity Jewish author, reconciled the Egyptian story to adapt it into his Torah story. So fun times. And so as a result, because you can't have Noah being a descendant of Cain, that would be horrifying. You have to have it through a good guy, not a bad guy. And so then, yeah, you mess up the Bible when you do that. Yeah, that's the battle between Horus and Set, is that when Set was fully grown and taught how to battle against Set by Thoth, David, he went back to Egypt and went to reclaim the throne of his father. And they had to have competitions. And that's the battle, basically. But they were competitions. And at the beginning of the competition, Set plucks out the eyes of Horus. That's the first battle. And Horus loses his sight. Now in Egyptian, the two eyes of Horus are the word for seer. And I'll probably make that the cover photo for you guys. I'll have to plug in my device so I can obtain that picture for you guys. The two eyes of Horus is a indication of the loss of authority as the great king and high priest of Egypt. And Set doing it is his usurping position. He usurped the kingdom from Osiris, murdering him, and so taking the eyes of Horus also replays that part, that he is the one who does not have the right to authority. He can't just take the eyes of Horus and become the seer of the kingdom. And in Egyptian, the eyes of Horus were also symbolic of the sun and the moon. Remember the prophecies of the signs of the latter days? Sun shall be darkened, the moon darkened or turned to blood, which is the same thing. When the moon gets darkened, it's a lunar eclipse, which is a blood moon. If it's just a new moon, that's a different thing. But that is the Egyptian concept, is that the moon goes through the cycles of new moon to full moon and back to new moon. And that's the loss of his left eye, his religious eye. And so the moon is the symbolic for religion, and the right eye is symbolic for government. And so a plucking out of both eyes as a seer for both religion and government is symbolized by the sun and the moon darkening, and both happen together. So that's what the Egyptians were doing, was giving a date in the future for when Horus would return to restore the kingdom of Osiris, the kingdom of the 18th dynasty of Egypt, the kingdom of David, the kingdom of Moses. And this solar eclipses and lunar eclipses, they happen regularly. In fact, probably yearly, if not every other year. Somewhere in the world they happen. But again, it's symbolic of a future event. And so they need to happen over a specific area in the world during this time frame. and it is understood by the Egyptians that it will happen right at the beginning of the battle. And the beginning of the battle symbolizes the new year in the Egyptian religious calendar. So thus, on New Year's Day, in a future time, that will be the sign of the total solar eclipse. And then the lunar eclipse will be around that same time period, because lunar eclipses are more frequent than solar eclipses, but they need to be tied together over a specific area. And as I've already indicated, it's the United States that it needs to happen. So on New Year's Day of the Egyptian religious calendar, there needs to be a total solar eclipse over the whole United States. Yeah. That's why my eyes shot big. And I was like, oh my, when I heard the news on my local Fox channel on the 4th of November 2016 of the coming total solar eclipse over the whole United States. I mean, this was huge. I can't even stress to you how huge that event was. If you treated it lightly on that day, didn't even bother to make preparations to at least see it, to at least be aware of its happening, to take a break during your lunch hour or take a break from work to go out and at least be aware of it. You know, you missed out on the #1 event that the Egyptians prophesied about, giving the exact date about over 6,000 years ago. You know, the hephacephali that were placed under the Egyptian's head, the pyramid texts talk about it as being a sun representation, you know, the burning of the sun. But if you'll notice, it has a ring of text around it, in most of them anyway, and so it looks like as Egyptologists believe, a dilated eye, a dilated pupil of the eye. But Egyptians don't understand. They're not putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. This has to do with the prophecy of the last days Horus, the one who will come when his eyes get plucked out, meaning that the government and the religion of the United States is to collapse, so that Horus can restore the government and the religion. And the hephacephali is symbolic of both the solar and the lunar eclipse. And so yes, Mormons, facsimile #2. I bet not a single scholar has told you that, have they? They're not really scholars. They call themselves apologists. That's why no other scholar in Egyptian outside of the church gives Mormon scholars any credibility. So yes, they may have peer-reviewed works within their own BYU community, but they're not legitimate. They don't know what they're talking about. They've had it right in their midst this whole time, you Mormons, and you've done nothing with it. Why? Because Brigham Young usurped the kingdom from Joseph Smith being murdered. Oh my goodness, it's the connection. It's the same symbolism. Yeah, you're living in an apostate church. It's that simple. There's no twisting of things. That's the pattern. I've showed you guys in the videos about the Jewish scriptures and traditions and the Christian scriptures and traditions. And I still need to get to the traditions with St. Patrick and Jesus the fish. But yeah, it all ties together, people, because it all comes from the Egyptians. This is where the religions come from. And even Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam, they all come from the Egyptians originally. That's the source. That's the source of life, the source of our culture, the source of our people, where we're only a 0.2% difference max as human beings. So yes, some people are different colors. Some people have different hair colors, different eye colors. Some people are taller, some people are shorter, some people are big boned, others are skinny. We're all human. We all spoke the same language at one point in time. We all came from the same source parents. So, and you have Neanderthals, but that's where the story of the flood comes in. 3 different family groups of sons and their wives for the 3 different areas that they go to are the 3 family units that DNA specialists have identified. Neanderthals in Europe, humans in Egypt, and I can't remember the title name of the other group over in Iran and Iraq. But those are the 3 groups that DNA specialists have identified. And sure enough, it matches the Bible story. It matches the Assyrian story. It matches the Egyptian story. So there's something to that. Alright, so in a previous video I talked about how sunrise is birth, noon is kingship, and then sunset is death. And during the dark period is when the battle against the serpent, Apophis, occurs. And it's usually the sun god Ra who's portrayed, but it's also understood in the context of the main story of the Egyptians. Osiris is murdered at sunset, and then his son Horus battles Apophis, the serpent, during the nighttime, and in the morning he is born, and then he's raised up to become the king. That's the concept. Christmas, everybody I'm sure is now familiar that it's just a pagan holiday. It wasn't really the birth date of Jesus, because Jesus is Osiris, not Horus. But with sheep in the field, it was not Christmas time either. It was just before Easter time. That's when the sheep were out in the field. So the shepherds wouldn't know about the birth during the winter time. And so, yeah, the birth has to do more with fish, Pisces constellation. But that's when I will talk about St. Patrick. And so, yeah, the concept of being born again, as Jesus talks to the one person about being born again. And the guy says, how can I be born again? How am I supposed to come out of my mother's womb a second time? And so then Jesus explains it. It's a spiritual thing. It's a symbolic thing. It's referring to a resurrection of the body, but also a resurrection of the soul. A glorified soul when you enter the presence of Osiris, or Heavenly Father if you're Christian. You can't. So the names have changed in the different religions, but it's the same people in all of the religions. That's why I've been able to be the one to discover that the Hebrew god Yah is the Greek god Zeus. They're the exact same god. They're spelled the exact same way. And you're saying, well, no, because Z is not the Yod. What is the Paleo-Hebrew shape of the Yod? That's right, Z. And it's pictorially the same. It wasn't until after the Babylonian captivity that the Jews conformed the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet to Babylonian language, and thus transformed Paleo-Hebrew into Semitic, being called Hebrew. And so what used to be the Zeta in Greek became the Yod in Semitic Hebrew of the Assyrian Babylonian culture. But originally, Paleo-Hebrew, it was the Zeta. So there's a little other information for you. And so, yeah, the total solar eclipse over the United States was predicted, identified specifically by date by the ancient Egyptians. Long time ago. Long before the pyramid texts. Long before 6000 BC. I need to throw in some bees into the mix, because I pointed out how Utah is Judah in the phonetic phoneme comparison. They're phonetically the same, just like Thoth and David are phonetically the same, excuse me. The bee. In Egyptian, it looks like a wasp. They didn't really have a bee from the origins. That became a later thing, a bumblebee figure of a later development. This wasp became the symbol of the northern kingdom, whereas for the southern kingdom of Egypt, the vulture became the symbol. And interestingly, the vulture is a scavenger bird. It's lazy. It waits for its prey to die, and then they swoop in and take parts of the body to eat after the body has died. Whereas the bee is industrious and labor intensive, so that it shows you the two different cultural interpretations. Lazy people to the south, and active industrialist people to the north. It's somewhat of an insult, but it stuck, because the symbols were often utilized throughout the culture. And yes, people are saying, no, Travis, the Northern Kingdom was the cobra, the uraeus. Yes, but the animal symbol for the northern crown was Deseret, and that's symbolic of a bee in Egyptian. Even though I think bee in Egyptian is pronounced bayet, sort of like the Hebrew house or daughter. Yeah, and the Uraeus is just another symbol of the Horus eye. The third eye, as witches call it. But again, they're thousands of years after. That's where the third eye comes from, is the concept of the eyes of Horus being seers. The word seer. And it's pronounced in Egyptian P-T-R. No vowels. So the consonants P, T, and R. And so Egyptologists have learned, through at least the British Egyptologists, to put in E's for vowels in order to pronounce things. And yes, as you can figure, different countries have their different vowels that they put into it. So that's why you'll see different spellings of Egyptian god names when you look them up on Wikipedia, for example. It's because it's a different country with the scholar who was prominent in the field who established his own phonetics for the name of the god. So that's where that comes from. But it's the consonants you need to worry about. And so, yes, what does Jesus do when he is claiming to be passing on the kingdom to a certain man who's named Simon, and gives him a new name of Peter? And he says, upon this rock I will build my church. What is a rock? In magic and witchcraft, it's a crystal ball. What is a crystal ball used for? Seeing things. It is their seer stone. And so, yeah, that's where that comes from, is because Jesus was saying, hey, Peter, you're now the seer. And you're going to lead the church through revelation, seership. And so Catholics don't understand that the Pope is just a bishop. He's not a seer. So he doesn't speak for God. He's not the vicar of Christ. Sorry, guys. He's got to be a seer, which means he needed to be appointed by the apostles and thus appointed by Jesus. Though it's clear Jesus actually appointed James, his brother, to take over in his place after his murder. Because Peter and James have a discussion, and Peter submits to James's authority. Look it up. So, yeah, so sorry, Catholics, you tried to get away with it by sneaking it in the scripture, but you didn't fully understand what it was that you were putting in, and you got burned. Alright, so that's the Egyptian story. So go back to your scriptures. Compare the story with all the other Torah, Tanakh, Gospel, and Revelation scriptures, and it opens your eyes to the interpretation or the original intention of what the author was trying to portray. And the sun, moon symbols of the last days, that had to do with the eyes of Horus, the last days when Horus would be born. And like I said to Christians, John's revelation was specifically giving a date of 2017 for when the battle would begin, and the month previous was the plucking out of the government eye January 31st of this year was the religious eye. So, yeah, pay attention, Mormons, because you're the religious part of it. And Trump is the government part of it, because it happened under him. And how did Trump get into office? He usurped the presidency. He did not win by vote. Russia hacked the votes. Trump usurped the presidency. He's the illegitimate president. He does not have authority. A restoring president needs to take over the presidency of the United States. That's what all this means. The Egyptians knew this way back when. That's incredible. And so, you know, you can claim to be alt-right conservative and Trump is the chosen one of God, but you're just deceiving yourselves. You know, you're like the 19th dynasty who claims to be Set. You know you're the usurpers. And yet you claim that you have authority to lead the government. You don't. The kingdom needs to be restored. The Constitution needs to be restored. It's that simple. And yet the Egyptians knew this. That's incredible. It blows scientists' minds. How did they know? There's no way they could have known. It's not possible. And so then you get sci-fi people helping the scientists out. Oh, well, they were able to travel through time. No, there's no time travel possible. I don't care what what's his name said before he died. There is no God. I'm dead. I think it was Trevor Noah. I think. Either that or it was Seth. You're broke. That comedian, late night comedian. I can't remember his name. Because it's not Seth Rogen, that's a movie star actor. But they were talking about, what is it, Carl Sagan? No, not Carl Sagan. That's from Young Sheldon that I just watched from last night. The wheelchair guy who had the disease and therefore is wheelchair bound, and everybody thinks he's a genius because he comes up with weird things that can never be proven scientifically. If you can't repeat it, you can't say it as a theory. It's not a theory if you can't replicate it. You guys know that in science. So why are you giving credibility to people who come up with these weird ideas? So anyway, he said before he died, there is no God. And one of the late night comedians, I can't remember which now, said, well, he just, you know, that's, if he turns out to be wrong, he's going to be quite embarrassed. I can't remember the joke specifically, but, you know, it's not a, you know, most people do deathbed repentance. They don't declare on their deathbed there is no God. So, fun times. Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting time, even though it's extremely scary. Because if you understand Set and what he did to the kingdom of Egypt, he just desolated the place. He just put it into ruin, into abject slavery and oppression. And that's why there's the need for a restoring Horus, as the Egyptians call him. And they knew all those years ago that we, in our day, 2017, 2018, would be having this same problem and this same need for a coming of the Son of God. Not a half man, half God, a full man, as the Egyptian, or as the Jews referred to their last days Messiah. And like I said, he was to live in Oakland, California, by the oak trees that are as tall and big as the cedars of Lebanon. That's why Ezekiel 17 talks about it that way. Because he didn't know oak trees, he knew cedars of Lebanon. So he used cedars of Lebanon in his story, because that's what he knew to utilize as his explanation. And he didn't know the United States, he just knew that the symbol would be the eagle. So he says the eagle takes the branch or the twig of the top of the branches of the cedars of Lebanon to the United States and plants it in Northern California, where Oakland, California is. And that's where Horus of the last days would be born. Just like the Isis taking the child, her pregnant child, or embryo child, to the wilderness, to the west. So there you go. There's the Egyptian connection. And so Samson having bees shoved in the mouth of the lion, that's all symbolic. The Sphinx, what do you think the Sphinx is? It's a lion with the human head of one of the pharaohs at the time of its building. And yeah, King David is the one who has the dream that's recorded on the Egyptian stela, and claiming his authority to be the king of Egypt. So there you go. Egyptologists have now learned something too. So next we'll go back over the other symbolisms. St. Patrick, the Norse god Tyr, because this has to do with the date of the birth. It's not the 23rd of September 2017 that John the Revelator says. That's for the last day's battle, when that is. But the Chinese New Year of the dog. This is the year of the dog in the Chinese New Year, or the Chinese year. And that was when the man-child, Horus, last days Messiah, the one mighty and strong, whichever religion you are a part of, and whoever you name him, that's when he was born, was understanding these other symbols. And even Jesus as a fish, you know, Pisces, I already mentioned that. And that's that gives you a clue. And so yeah, I already revealed it with St. Patrick, but you need to know the year. And that's where you throw in the Chinese year of the dog. So you can know, everybody is known. It's just you have to assemble everything together to find the big picture. And then after I do the symbols next, and it may not be today because I've got to take care of some matters clear across town. So the Mormons will be after the symbols, and then I'll tell you all about this last days Messiah, who he is, what has happened to him, to demonstrate that he's fulfilling the symbolisms. And I've already revealed much of it anyway, but there's other stuff that has happened that ties it all in together. And so, like I said, with the doctrinal concept of Noah, I mean, the people of Noah, they didn't believe Noah. They weren't listening to God. God was telling people, hey, I'm not a wrathful God like a certain scholar will in the future, who will blame me for being a wrathful God of the Old Testament and then all of a sudden changing and becoming a good God of the New Testament. No, it had nothing to do with that. God was warning the people. There's a flood coming. They wouldn't listen. He was able to communicate with Noah. Noah listened. Noah then went to the people. Hey, there's going to be a flood. They still wouldn't listen. They didn't believe Noah. They didn't see him as authoritative. They didn't believe him. And guess what? You know, you guys have been warned. You knew about the last days. You have it in your Revelation. You have it in Matthew 24. You have it throughout the Old Testament. You know about the last days. You've had the signs given to you, and then they've appeared, and yet you still don't believe. You allowed Trump to stay in office. You know, they won't remove him immediately. They aren't saying, hey, wait a minute, the votes were fraudulent. We have to do the vote over again. No, let's give him a try. Maybe he won't be as bad as he was talking. He's now worse. He's the beast. He's the dragon. He's the serpent. He's Set. He's destroying our country. He's destroying the world. Just like Set did. So, yeah. And you have President Obama getting up and saying, don't look for a last days Messiah. Don't look for a savior to save you. You save yourselves by voting, and then the Russians will alter your vote or cancel it altogether so that Trump can continue to stay in office. That's the one thing that frustrates me over and over again, because I listen to left-wing media. I can't tolerate right-wing media anymore. Like I said, I used to listen to local Fox, but this just gotten so frustrating with Trump. It just, they really treat us like we're dumb in alt-right conservative press. It's like, and yet people are still parroting them. You know, Paul Gregerson, you know, I am exposing him. I'm calling him out because he wrote a comment and then deleted it, but he still wrote a comment saying that alt-right conservatism is going to conquer communism. Paul, you're Mormon. You know about the Mormon theology of Lucifer, how he takes away agency to save people. That's what alt-right conservatives do. They take away constitutional rights to protect us with increased security. Come on, guys. This is it. Your religions all were founded upon this day and time. Why do you not believe? Why will you allow yourselves to be destroyed like the people in the days of Noah? Please don't die. Because on the other side of the chaos, once we cast out Set from authority in both government and religion and establish the true kingdom of God on earth, everything will be great. But not for you if you don't believe and you die. We have to fight for freedom. And it ain't going to be in the vote, even though there's the highest ranking of people going out to the votes for the pre-election than ever in history. You know, that's great that you guys finally want to do something. And hopefully it's because you want to overthrow Trump. That's what it seems to be, but we're not quite sure. I don't trust polls, because polls are not the percentage of all America. They're the percentage of those they polled. So if they only poll 1,000 people, if Trump's numbers are 36%, it's 36% out of 1,000 people. It's not 36% out of 300 million people. That's the population of the United States, is over 300 million. That's not the percentage of the polls. Nobody's ever called me and say, hey, we're doing a poll, we'd like to ask you some questions. I've never been polled. My percentage is not included in any poll that's advertised, either on the left or on the right. It doesn't matter. I've never been included. And so it sickens me. You know, I just go, oh man, and I go to the kitchen to find something to snack on while they're rambling off about poll figures. Polls suggest that people don't like Trump anymore. Or if you're an alt-right conservative media, polls show that people are liking Trump more. You know, they rig the polls so that they can tell a story in the news. That's fake news. Trump is right about that part, but both Fox and the liberal media do it. You gotta tell the facts like Judy Woodruff on PBS NewsHour. But she doesn't tie everything together like Rachel Maddow does. Rachel's brilliant. I love watching her show. I specifically wait. Nobody can interrupt me during the 7 o'clock hour here in Utah, because her show is watched. And last night she did it again. She's able to tie the past with what's going on today. She's able to connect all the people, tell us their backgrounds, so that we understand why today's event is so significant. And she's brilliant for that. Nobody else does that. Not even on MSNBC. None of the other guys are as good as Rachel. You know, everybody else on MSNBC is many of them, not all of them, do these opinion panels. I don't want to hear opinions of people. I want facts. You can't tell me what Trump is thinking. Only Trump can tell me what he's thinking, but even then he lies, so I have to actually look at what he actually does. That's the news. What did he do today? Report that. I will assemble everything together from the past to the current to figure out, okay, that's apparently what Trump's up to. Just like Rachel does. So, yeah, I'm extending this video out longer than it needs to be. So I'm done with the Egyptian part. I just had to get that in those extra things, because otherwise I'd have to make the time to do videos, and I end up with a pile of notes of videos that I want to do, just like I came up with a pile of book notes of books that I want to make. And those take even longer to do than a video, because a video I can just talk on the video and save it and upload it. So, alright, so other symbolisms next, which will include St. Patrick, the Norse god Tyr, Chinese New Year's, and Jesus the fish. Jesus the fish. Ixthus.